Hello and welcome to Gin with Gwynne. I'm Oliver Gwynne, and this is where I give you my off the cuff and unrehearsed thoughts on marketing, data, and philosophy. This week I'm talking about first principles in AI workflows, or rather, how AI workflows seem to be abandoning first principles. What do I mean by this? I think at the moment, AI has already become everybody's lackey, everybody's intern, everybody's outsourced brain power. And too often we are guilty of just going, yeah, just let AI do that. Shove it to AI and see what it comes up with. And you could say that sometimes the results are good, sometimes they're bad. We all know that it's not always perfect at doing anything. But we're designing products, we're designing workflows that use AI in this way, and we are completely forgetting first principles of design, of workflows, of what we should really be focusing on. And in order to get the AI to do something, we are feeding in more and more information and asking it to contextualize the whole world. And so we are literally boiling the ocean for a drop of water. Edward R. Tufte said that confusion and clutter are failures of design, not attributes of information. And I think this is the perfect quote to sum up what I'm talking about, where we are feeding all of this information into AI, hoping it comes back with the right answer, instead of trying to normalize the input in finding the few data points that would really make a difference. And so abstraction is actually getting worse and not better because good workflows compress reality into the minimum variables that you need. Bad AI workflows do the opposite. They shovel in everything and then they ask the AI to find meaning. And so the outcome is a bloated prompt, noisy outcomes, brittle decisions often, and it's not very indexable, it's not very sort of searchable, it's not necessarily based on the truth, as we all know. And at this moment, yeah, this is a relatively low cost thing, but in the future we're all going to be paying more and more for AI, and so it's not necessarily sustainable to start building things on this or to outsourcing this difficulty when we could design a better system. So I'm trying to think of some examples of this. So think about travel planning. At the moment, you might be developing a travel planning app and you would put into your lazy workflow, plan me a weekend in Paris. Here are 20 preferences, my whole calendar. Here's my budget. And so you're giving it more and more categories, but you're not really giving it optimized data for your real constraints, which is your energy, your walking tolerance, jet lag, what your must do kind of places are, time windows. And so it's then going to spew out a load of stuff at you that might not be suitable, might not be preference. And then you're going to ask it again and ask it again and ask it again until you finally get to something that is sort of usable. But every time you ask it something, there's a cost. There's a cost to the environment. In the future, you're going to have to sit through ads to get replies, unfortunately. And so the idea is great. This idea that we can ask something and get a detailed answer back. But unless we put constraints beyond just prompt engineering and design something that would surface the really important things that matter to the situation in hand, so going back to first principles, then you're going to get the wrong answer and it's going to cost you more money. And first principles here might be asking first, how many hours do you have free? What are the must do's? What are your preferences about transit between the places? Do you care about atmosphere over landmarks? And then when you get those constraints that really matter to you, which can be done in a form, it can be done in a much more simple way, then you can feed something into AI and get a much better result as opposed to having to prompt engineer and prompt engineer and prompt engineer. And isn't it annoying so often when you give AI instructions and it just seems to ignore what you've told it, even if you've been very black and white? And so in this example, a one page of constraint sheets could make a huge difference to the end outcome. And you might also want to stop it from boiling the ocean for a drop of water. So here are the guidebooks that I like. Just go off of these to plan my trip. These are the sources that I trust so that it's not just taking AI generated articles and then feeding them back to you. Maybe you give it a Google Maps and you have 10 saved pins, or different clusters of places that you want to go. And so you've got to do one of those anchors per day and something like that. AI is sort of good at normalization and bad at normalization at the same time. So it's very useful where you have a list of attributes where you want to say, hey, here's my long list of 100 people who've given me their CV. And some of them say Euston, some of them say Stratford. And actually, I need them to all say London, and it will get 90% of those correct. And it can do that almost instantly. And it's a lot faster than you having to go down a long spreadsheet. It's great for that. It can turn free text into clean, comparable formats. Do you have to give it the structure for that? Yes. Do you have to give it benchmarks? Yes. Do you have to tell it what the categories are? Yes. And thinking about that is important and not something that you can ask the AI to do necessarily because the AI doesn't understand your context. And it can save you a lot of time. It's good at normalization from that point of view, but it's also very bad at normalization in a very dangerous sense because it tends to smooth away the very irregularities that give something meaning so often. When you ask it to contextualize everything, it averages nuances into plausible, generic narratives. It gets rid of edge cases, it gets rid of uncertainty, it gets rid of those minority signals into the most normal looking interpretations of things. And that can quietly shift the question that you should be asking from feasibility to trade offs and bland balances that make weird but important stuff look like noise. And so you get outputs that are very tidy, very readable, but they are less faithful to reality because model normalizes the world to fit the patterns instead of forcing you to normalize the problem into the few variables that matter. And that's where we are abandoning critical thinking about what data really matters, what input really matters, what information really matters. This is something I see all the time in data. People will have a huge data analytics bill because they just extract all the data. Maybe they need it in the future, or maybe we want it for something else, and they're hoping it will be helpful instead of really focusing on the 6 or 7 use cases that will actually make a decision. And so, over estimating the amount of data and data points that you need is really bad. And also over complicating a product. Instead of having to feed in raw text and having some AI contextualize it, can you make a form? Can you make a different interface that would then get you to 90% of the answer? Maybe a filter is the first use case, and then an algorithm for matching comes after that. If your prompt is longer than your decision statement, you're probably avoiding the real work. If you were deciding between A and B and you care about X, Y, and Z, success looks like this is what you want to think about. And then you can use AI to compress, extract, or test, but not to replace the judgment. And the judgment is very difficult sometimes because you're dealing in a gray world of semantics where everything is slightly different, every decision is slightly different to different people. But ultimately, we are trying to come up with something that works for everybody, basically. Another example of this would be analytic dashboards and how they can so often become numbers without decisions. A lazy workflow is to send some data to AI and interpret this dashboard. And maybe you then give it the context of your business and you give it some recent reports. And then you start to feed in more and more information that you're hoping it will read and interpret and understand. Models in this case will give you confident narratives from coincidental patterns. And teams have a tendency of skipping defining what each metric should trigger in terms of a decision. And so it tells you this went up, down, this is what happened. But it can't really tell you the wider context of the world. It can't tell you that, oh, the reason why your Q4 profits were down so much is because you're a Halloween store and Halloween was over or whatever it might be. And so, unless you give it more and more information, you come up with a bad result. But that's what's happening today because it's cheap and it's easy and it's fast. So, how do we come to thinking about things in first principle terms? Everything comes back to three things for me, which is what data or what input do you really need to collect? Like, really need to collect. But how do you figure that out? Then comes to what decisions are you actually going to be able to make? It's no good the AI giving you £1,000,000 suggestions when your budget is £100. It's no good the AI saying, yeah, post some blogs and you'll get some interest. That's not how the world works. We all know that things take time to go out to the market and for them to realize and understand what you're doing. And so you have to really think about what decisions are you actually going to be able to make from this. It's no good saying, oh, we need to grow our business by 20%. Cool. How are you going to do that? What are the levers you're going to press? Who is your audience that you're going to do? Time is finite. So, what decisions do you really need to make in order to do that? And how will these input variables decide or influence those decisions? And then above decisions, there's behaviors. What behaviors do we want to encourage? This could be we want to make sure our customers have the best possible experience, no matter what. It's important to retain them because we know that retention is so difficult to get people in. We're in a niche. It's hard to find these people. So we have to retain these people no matter what. And that might mean that we have to give them 20% more of our time than we'd like to. Okay, we need to build a system into that. Okay, what decisions can we make to make sure that that happens? Well, first of all, we need to understand how much time we can give them and what is over that time before we become unprofitable. And so the decision might be, hey, I want to help this customer, but they've only got how much time do they have left? I need to collect that variable. How do I collect that variable? Well, I need to understand how much time I've spent on them. Where does that come from? It comes from a timesheet or it comes from this data point. And instead of having to collect all of this different information and put it into AI and make a decision, all I actually need to do is figure out per client how much time has been spent on them, how much time is remaining, what is that client worth to me, and I don't need to even put AI into this workflow necessarily. But where would AI come into that? Maybe you want to say, hey, I've got 2,000 people. I don't know where to spend my time. I know the value and I know how much time is left on them. Prioritize their concerns for me in terms of easiness, maybe. And that makes a lot more sense. You're getting to an answer quickly thanks to AI. You're filtering out 90% of the people who don't deserve your time and just focusing on that 10%, asking AI to rank them. That makes sense. And so when we think about first principles, it's really what's the decision, what constraints really matter, and it's less about let's leave the decision to AI. It's more thinking about let's make that decision easier for me. AI is bad for the environment. AI hallucinates things. It doesn't understand context. Even when you give it the context, sometimes it doesn't understand it. This is very important to remember. AI is going to be a cost going forward. It is not a black box that you can trust for everything, especially depending on the kind of stuff that you're going to put in there. And ultimately, when you give something to this particular black box, it might say that it's not sharing this with other people and whatnot, but I don't believe that for a second. I think that if you give it the decisions that you need to make and your client's data, then everybody else will have these, and you are helping to train the perfect email sequence for everybody else as well as yourself. And so think very carefully about how you integrate AI into your workflows, what really matters, especially before you think about agentic or anything else like that. In most cases, what you need is good, solid model data normalized so that then AI can read on top of it. Thanks very much for watching. Let me know your thoughts below and welcome. Welcome. Thanks for watching another Gin with Gwynne.